The mall was dying, had been dying for years, and nobody had bothered to tell the architects. The escalators still ran on their appointed schedules. The fountains still cycled through their programmed routines. The climate control maintained a perfect 72 degrees in corridors where the only footsteps were my own, echoing off marble that had been installed during a different era when people still believed that permanence was possible. I'd been hired to manage the closing procedures, which meant I was being paid to preside over a slow funeral. The mall's parent company had decided to consolidate operations. 3 locations in the tri-state area would be shuttered. Meridian Valley Mall, built in 1987, was scheduled for demolition in 6 months. Until then, someone needed to ensure the building remained secure, that the utilities didn't fail catastrophically, that the infrastructure continued its slow decline without accelerating into total collapse. That someone was me. My name is David Chen, and I was 42 years old when I took the job. That detail matters because I'd spent the preceding decade slowly understanding that my life was not going to be the life I'd imagined. I'd been a software engineer once, had worked for a startup that had seemed like it might change the world. It hadn't. It had changed nothing, and then it had dissolved, and I'd been left with a resume that was somehow both overqualified and unmarketable. The jobs that came after had been lateral moves into irrelevance, contracts that didn't renew, positions that evaporated when funding dried up. A long, slow slide into the kind of employment that didn't require you to be exceptional, only available. The mall closure job was being offered at $45,000 annually, plus benefits for a position that was supposed to last exactly 6 months. $45,000 was enough to catch up on back rent, to pay down the credit card debt I'd accumulated during the lean months, to buy myself a small cushion of stability before I had to figure out the next chapter. It was not a sustainable solution, but it was a solution, which was more than I'd had before. The hiring manager, a woman named Patricia from the liquidation company, had gone over the procedures with me on a Tuesday morning in the mall's administrative office. The office itself was a relic, decorated with the particular aesthetic of the 1990s, all mauve and teal and ergonomic pretensions. Patricia had handed me a 3-ring binder and a set of keys that must have weighed 5 pounds. "The closing routine is straightforward," she'd said, speaking with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd done this before and would do it again. "You arrive at 6 p.m. You walk the mall to confirm that all tenants have left. You secure all external doors except the main entrance. You lock up the administrative offices and the back corridor areas. At 9 p.m. sharp, you lock the main entrance and activate the security system. You perform a final walkthrough to ensure nothing is amiss. Then you leave." "Every day?" I'd asked. "6 days a week. Sundays you'll have off. The mall will be closed to the public on Sundays anyway. Just come in Monday through Saturday, execute the routine, and everything will be fine." She'd made it sound simple. She'd made it sound like the kind of job where nothing would go wrong because nothing could go wrong. A building, no matter how dying, was still just a building. Doors and locks and security systems, procedural compliance and paperwork, the kind of work that required only attention to detail and the ability to follow instructions. Then she'd opened the binder and showed me the list. There were 17 closing procedures, each with specific steps and timing requirements. 17 different areas of the mall. 17 different security protocols. The list was meticulous, laminated, formatted with the kind of obsessive care that suggested it had been revised and refined many times. Some of the procedures seemed redundant, others seemed oddly specific. But there was one that didn't fit the pattern. It was listed as Procedure 14, the Service Corridor Access Door. The description was minimal. It simply stated, "The Service Corridor Access Door, east side, adjacent to the former Sears location, is to remain unlocked at all times. Do not lock this door under any circumstances. Do not secure the deadbolt. Do not wedge the door. Maintain access. This is non-negotiable." Patricia had seen me reading it, had seen the question forming on my face, and had held up her hand before I could ask. "That one's in the contract," she'd said. "It's a structural issue. The locking mechanism is integrated with the building's fire suppression system somehow. If the door is locked, it creates a pressure differential that can trigger false alarms. Maintenance has looked at it multiple times. It's just easier to leave it open." It was a logical explanation. It had the ring of institutional truth, the kind of thing that happens in older buildings where previous renovations have left systems tangled and interdependent. I'd nodded, accepted it, and moved on. But I'd marked the page. I started on a Monday evening in late February. The mall was already in its death throes, though nobody had found a way to articulate that without seeming unprofessional. There were maybe 60 tenants left out of the original 230. Most of them were operating on month-to-month leases, waiting for eviction proceedings to formalize what was already obvious. The food court was half empty. The movie theater had closed 3 months earlier. The anchor stores, Sears, Macy's, JCPenney, had been boarded up for years. What remained were the small businesses that either couldn't leave or hadn't yet accepted the inevitability: a frozen yogurt shop, a wireless carrier outlet, a game store, a jewelry repair counter, a nail salon, an optometrist's office, a few others. They were scattered throughout the mall like survivors on an island after a shipwreck, each one hoping that something would change, that the decline would reverse, that the corporation would suddenly recognize the error and reinvest. I doubted any of them would make it to the demolition date. My first evening, I followed the procedures exactly. I walked the mall from the main entrance to the farthest reaches, confirming that the remaining shops had locked their gates and powered down their systems. I made notes in the logbook as instructed. I checked the bathrooms, the parking areas visible from the windows, the storage closets. I moved methodically through the 3-story structure, documenting the slow entropy of the place. The mall was genuinely eerie at closing time, not haunted exactly, but aware of its own inadequacy. The fluorescent lights, which hadn't been replaced in the entire time I worked there, created a particular quality of illumination that seemed to drain rather than reveal. The tile floors, once polished to a gleam, had been worn to a kind of matte finish by millions of footsteps over decades. The fountains that were still operational burbled away in the silence, the sound seeming to emphasize rather than alleviate the emptiness. I locked the secondary entrances as instructed. I made my way through the administrative areas and secured those doors. I checked the service corridor access door, the one I wasn't supposed to lock, and confirmed that it was indeed open. It was a simple door, unmarked except for a faded number. It led into a narrow corridor that disappeared into darkness. I didn't venture into it. I simply confirmed its status, made a note in the logbook, and moved on. By 8:45, I was ready for the final walkthrough. By 9 o'clock, I'd locked the main entrance and activated the security system. By 9:15, I'd done my final verification and was walking back to the main exit to leave. Everything had been exactly as it should be. I did this 5 more times that week. Monday through Saturday, the same routine, the same procedures, the same confirmation that nothing was amiss. By the end of the first week, the routine had become automatic. I could have done it with my eyes closed. I probably would have eventually. Because that's what happens with repetitive tasks. You perform them so many times that they lose their meaning, become pure muscle memory, your conscious mind able to wander to other concerns while your body executes the motions. On the second Monday, I noticed something. I was performing Procedure 7, which involved checking the bathrooms and confirming that all fixtures were functioning properly. It was a task that served no obvious purpose. The bathrooms weren't going to be used by anyone other than myself, and I had my own bathroom at home. But it was written into the procedures, so I performed it. I was in the women's bathroom on the second floor, checking the stalls, when I noticed something that hadn't been there the previous week. A footprint. Just one. On the tile floor near the third stall, as though someone had walked from the stall to the door, or perhaps from the door to the stall. It was a bare footprint, water-based, still slightly damp, and it couldn't have come from me because I was wearing shoes, and I hadn't walked that particular path during my current walkthrough. I checked that bathroom during my closing on Saturday. There had been no footprint then. I'd stood there for a moment, looking at the print, my mind running through possibilities. A custodian might have come in. There was supposed to be a cleaning service that came in on Sunday mornings, though I'd never seen evidence of them. Someone might have gotten locked inside and left the footprint sometime on Sunday. But the likelihood of all those things being true was low. I'd wiped up the footprint and made a note in the logbook, just a brief line about evidence of unauthorized access. Then I'd continued with the procedures, my attention a little sharper, my mind a little less on autopilot. The rest of the walkthrough had been normal. Nothing else seemed out of place. I'd locked up and left as usual. On Tuesday, I'd found another footprint. This one was in the men's bathroom, in almost the same location relative to the stalls. The same bare foot, it seemed, based on the size and shape. Still damp, still impossible to have come from me. I'd wiped it up again, made another note, and called the corporate office the next morning. Patricia had been oddly evasive. Unauthorized access, she'd repeated as though I'd said something strange. To the bathrooms? It looks like someone is in the mall after hours, I'd said, or during the day and they're not leaving when the mall closes. I've found footprints 2 days in a row. There had been a pause on the line, long enough that I'd wondered if the connection had dropped. That's probably just the cleaning service, Patricia had said finally. They come in on Sunday mornings and sometimes work late. If they're tracking water from the bathrooms, they're just being sloppy. You can leave them a note if it bothers you. But the cleaning service was supposed to come on Sunday mornings. If they were coming on Sunday nights or Monday and Tuesday mornings, why had they never appeared during my closing procedures? And why would Patricia sound uncertain about it? I'd let it drop, not because I believed her explanation, but because pushing back seemed like a good way to lose a job I couldn't afford to lose. By the end of the second week, I'd found 7 footprints across 3 different bathrooms. They were all similar in size and shape, all positioned in approximately the same location relative to the stalls, all equally impossible to explain. And they were becoming more frequent. Where I'd been finding them sporadically in the first week, I was now finding them almost every day. On Friday of the second week, I'd made a decision. I'd arrived at the mall at 6 p.m. as usual. I'd walked the common areas and confirmed that the shops were closing. But instead of following Procedure 7 and checking the bathrooms as scheduled, I'd positioned myself in the second-floor bathrooms area at 6:30 and simply waited. The mall was mostly empty by that time. I was alone on the second floor, sitting on a bench outside the bathrooms watching. Waiting. There was no logical reason to expect anything to happen, but I'd felt something in the air, a kind of presence, the sense that I was being observed by something I couldn't quite identify. At 6:58, exactly 2 minutes before I was scheduled to check the bathrooms, the women's bathroom door had opened. A figure had emerged. It had been a woman, I thought, though something about the way she moved made that assessment uncertain. She'd been walking barefoot, her feet still wet, leaving footprints on the tile. She'd looked directly at me for just a moment, and in that moment, I'd felt something like recognition, as though she'd been expecting to see me there. Then she'd turned and walked away, moving deeper into the mall, disappearing into the darkness of the corridor that led toward the service areas. I'd stood up to follow, but by the time I'd gotten to the point where she'd turned, she was gone. Not hidden around a corner, not waiting in a shop. Simply gone, as though she'd dissolved into the building itself. I'd stood there in the darkness for longer than I wanted to admit, my heart rate elevated, my hands shaking slightly. I'd been trying to make sense of what I'd seen. A person in the mall after hours. A person with wet feet, as though she'd come from the bathrooms. A person who'd acknowledged my presence and then vanished. The only explanation that made sense was the one I kept trying to dismiss. There was something wrong with the mall. Something structural. Something that had nothing to do with cleaning services or maintenance workers or any rational explanation. I'd finished my procedures on autopilot that evening, my mind somewhere else entirely. I'd locked the doors, activated the security system, and left without my usual sense of completion. For the first time since starting the job, I'd felt like I was leaving something unfinished behind. That weekend I'd done something I'd been avoiding. I'd researched the mall's history. The Meridian Valley Mall had been built in 1987 on land that had previously been industrial. The site itself had a longer history. During the 1960s and 1970s, it had housed a manufacturing facility, some kind of textile production operation. Before that, it had been farmland. Before that, nothing documented, just empty space on a map of New Jersey. The current mall had been successful for about 20 years. It had reached its peak around 2005, with over 200 retailers in a food court that apparently served 8,000 people on weekends. Then the inevitable decline. Online shopping, changing retail landscapes, the opening of bigger malls in adjacent towns, the slow erosion that had now reached the point where it made more sense to demolish than to maintain. What I didn't find was any documented incident, any tragedy or accident that might explain why I was seeing a barefoot woman walking through the bathrooms after hours. No unsolved disappearance, no building collapse, no fire or death or any of the conventional reasons a building might become strange. The mall was just a mall. It was just dying. On Monday of the third week, I found a note. I was performing Procedure 7, checking the bathrooms when I saw it. It was on the floor of the second bathroom stall, the women's room on the second floor, right where the footprints usually appeared. The note was written on a piece of mall stationery, the kind they used at the information desk. The handwriting was small and precise, printed in blue ballpoint pen. It said, "You're watching too closely." I'd picked up the note with trembling fingers. I'd stared at it for a long time, trying to process what it meant. Someone had written it. Someone inside the building, during operating hours presumably, and had left it for me to find. Someone who understood that I was looking for them, who knew about my observations, who wanted me to know that I'd been noticed. I'd stood in that bathroom stall for a long time, reading the same sentence over and over. You're watching too closely. Not a threat exactly, more like a warning. More like a communication from someone who wanted to ensure I understood the parameters of our interaction. I'd pocketed the note and finished my procedures. I'd been careful to do everything exactly as written, to perform each task with no deviation, to demonstrate that I'd understood the message. Don't watch too closely. Don't try to understand. Just follow the procedures. That night I'd locked the service corridor access door. I don't know why I did it. It violated the specific instruction in the procedures. It violated the contract. It was directly contrary to Patricia's explanation. But something about the note, about the whole situation, had shifted my thinking. The service corridor access door was meant to remain open. That was clear from the emphasis, from the specificity, from the fact that it was the only unusual instruction in an otherwise mundane set of procedures. If the door was meant to remain open, that meant something was meant to be able to use it. Something was meant to be able to access the service corridors and whatever lay beyond them. I'd locked the door to see what would happen. Nothing happened that night, or the next night, or the night after that. I'd gone through the closing procedures. I'd locked the doors. I'd activated the security system, and everything had proceeded normally. The footprints had stopped appearing. The figure had not reappeared. There had been no note, no evidence of anything unusual. It was as if by locking the door, I'd locked something out, or locked something in. On Thursday, Patricia called. "I'm getting reports that the service corridor access door is locked," she'd said without preamble. "Yes," I'd said, "I locked it." "You need to unlock it," she'd said. Her tone had changed. Where she'd been neutral before, almost disinterested, now she sounded urgent. "Immediately." "Why?" I'd asked. There had been a long pause. "Because the procedure requires it," she'd finally said. "Because that's your job. Because the contract specifies it." "That's not an answer," I'd said. "Tell me what's actually going on. Why is that door so important? Who's in the mall?" Another pause, longer this time. "If you want to keep your job," Patricia had said very quietly, "you will unlock that door tonight. You will not ask questions about it. You will not attempt to understand what's happening. You will simply follow the procedures as written. Do you understand?" "No," I'd said. "I don't understand. I don't understand any of this." "That's fine," she'd said. "You don't need to understand. You need to comply." She'd hung up without waiting for a response. I'd called back 3 times. She hadn't answered. I'd tried the corporate office, but the main line had transferred me to an automated voicemail system that only offered options for billing inquiries and lease information. No one had been available to discuss contract violations or mysterious service corridors. I'd sat in my apartment that evening staring at my phone, knowing what I was supposed to do, and knowing that I didn't want to do it. The job paid $45,000. I had 4 more months of payments coming to me, assuming nothing went wrong. That money was supposed to get me through the worst of it, supposed to buy me time to figure out the next step, supposed to be the thing that kept my life from completely falling apart. But the money was connected to unlocking that door. The money was connected to whatever was moving around in that mall after hours. I'd gone back anyway. Because that's what you do when you need the money. You compromise. You accept the things you can't understand. You perform the procedures without asking why. I'd unlocked the service corridor access door at 8:30 on Thursday evening. The lock had been stiff, unused to being moved, and it had taken me a full minute of jiggling the key before the deadbolt had slid back. The door had swung open slowly, revealing the darkness beyond. I'd stood in that doorway for a long time, looking into the service corridor. It was narrow, maybe 5 feet wide, with concrete walls and industrial lighting that hadn't been turned on. The darkness extended back maybe 30 feet before disappearing around a corner, and there was a smell coming from it, faint but distinct. Something like water and copper and something else I couldn't identify. I'd closed the door without looking further. I'd locked it again immediately, even though I'd just unlocked it, as if the physical act of locking it might undo what I'd just done. Then I'd finished my procedures. I'd locked the rest of the mall. I'd activated the security system. I'd left. And at midnight, I'd received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. The message consisted of a single sentence. "Thank you." That had been 1 week ago. Since then, I've continued to unlock the service corridor access door every evening at the same time. I've continued to follow all the other procedures exactly as written. I've continued to show up at the mall, to walk the closing route, to lock and lock again according to a rhythm I don't fully understand. The footprints have started appearing again. The figure I saw, the woman with wet feet, I've glimpsed her a few more times, always in peripheral vision, always disappearing before I can get a clear look. The notes have stopped, but sometimes I find small objects arranged in patterns on the bathroom floor. A penny, a length of string, a button. All placed carefully, all removed within the day. I've tried to research more thoroughly, to find out what was actually on this land before the mall was built. But the records are sparse for the textile factory, almost non-existent for whatever came before it. There are references to industrial accidents in the 1970s, but no details. There are city records of land transactions, but no reason given for why the land had been abandoned. What I've understood, without being told explicitly, is this. Something was here before the mall. Something that survived the construction. Something that exists in the service corridors and the spaces between. Something that required an open door to move through the building. When I locked that door, I'd cut off its access to the human spaces of the mall, and Patricia had made it clear, through implication, that I was expected to provide that access. The money is good. The job is secure, at least until the mall is demolished. And if I do what I'm supposed to do, if I follow the procedures and keep the door unlocked, nothing will hurt me. But I understand now that I'm not managing the closing of the mall. I'm managing something else entirely. I'm serving as a kind of custodian, a keeper of access, a guarantor that the spaces between remain permeable. The woman with wet feet, I've started to think of her as a messenger, a representative of whatever exists in those service corridors. She's not threatening. She's not trying to force anything. She's simply existing in the spaces she's been given access to, moving through the building in the ways that have been permitted, leaving behind small signs that she's there. It's almost like a negotiation. I provide access. Whatever is in the service corridors provides me with the income I need, the stability I need, the thing that keeps my life from completely falling apart. And in exchange, I perform my closing procedures. I unlock the door that I'm supposed to keep unlocked. I don't watch too closely. I don't ask too many questions. Yesterday I found something in the service corridor itself. I'd open the door to check on the lock, making sure it was functioning properly, and I'd look deeper into the darkness. For just a moment, before the darkness became absolute, I'd seen shapes. Not the woman, something larger, something that moved with a terrible fluidity, a grace that seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once. I'd closed the door immediately. I'd locked it. Then I'd waited, shaking, for the text message I knew would come. It had arrived at 8:47 p.m. Don't close it again. And I'd understood with perfect clarity what was being asked of me. The mall is dying. The building is being torn down in approximately 16 weeks. But during those 16 weeks, something needs access to the human spaces. Something needs to be able to move through the bathrooms and the corridors and the empty shops. Something needs a door to be unlocked, a passage to be kept open. Patricia knows. The corporate office knows. This is why the previous employee quit. This is why they needed someone new so desperately. This is why the job paid enough to solve my immediate problems while offering no long-term security. Because no one stays once they understand what they're doing. Once you've seen the thing in the service corridor, once you've understood the nature of your employment, you leave. Or you don't. You stay because the alternative is worse. You stay because the money matters. You stay because you've already compromised, and stopping now would mean acknowledging that you've compromised for nothing. You stay because desperation and accommodation can look very similar from the inside. I will unlock the service corridor access door every evening at 6:30. I will follow all the other procedures. I will not watch too closely. I will not ask questions. I will perform my job exactly as it's written, and I will wait for the day when the demolition crew arrives and tears this building down. And perhaps whatever lives in the service corridors will find another place to go. Or perhaps it will find another employee first. Perhaps the pattern will simply repeat. New person, same mystery, same choice between understanding and survival. I sometimes think about the woman with wet feet. I wonder if she was once like me, if she once worked here. If she once made the same choice I've made, if she's integrated into the building now, if she's become part of the machinery that keeps it running, if she's the mechanism through which the thing in the service corridors maintains its presence, if locking the door for long enough could transform someone into a message, a warning, a greeting. The mall continues its slow decline. The remaining shops are shuttering faster now. Soon there will be no one here but me, and the machinery that keeps the lights on, and the fountains running. Soon it will just be me and the thing that moves in the service corridors with nothing but an unlocked door between us. And I will keep showing up. I will keep unlocking that door. I will keep following the procedures. Because the truth is, that desperation is a kind of service corridor itself. It's a space that exists between the world as it should be and the world as it actually is. It's a passage that we all move through at some point, and we don't always choose what we become when we reach the other side. The door remains unlocked. Whatever needs access will use it. And I, who came here looking for 6 months of stability, have found instead a kind of equilibrium, a compromise, a new normal that is terrible and bearable in equal measure. This is what I do now. This is what I am. The mall's closing procedures require it.